My name is GiBi, this is Toto, and welcome to the Horror Homestead. This is a video in an ongoing series I'm making about the Five Nights at Freddy's Fazbear Frights novels. In each video I'm going to summarize, analyze, and theorize about one story from the Fazbear Frights anthology series. I'm currently a believer in the Frights fiction fan theory, which states that these books are actually in-universe novels published by Fazbear Entertainment to make light of the real horrific history of the franchise. We're now looking at the fifth physical book in the series, Bunny Call, and its third story, The Man in Room 1280. This is one of the most important books in the series because it's one of the main reasons that people like the idea of the Stitch line being canon. It introduces a lot of important information and might be our first look into the main FNAF plot post-Ultimate Custom Night. Help Wanted and even Security Breach seem like these odd side stories about people that we've never met. But The Man in Room 1280 tells us about the fates of some of the series' most important characters. Or does it? We'll investigate if this story can possibly fit into canon later, but for now, we'll just begin with the summary. This is one of the more dense stories, so it'll be one of those where the summary and the analysis are kind of all mixed together so we can see what's happening as we go. Our protagonist is a priest named Arthur, who's on his way to visit the hospital to visit patients. Before he arrives, we get a short scene from the perspective of the three nurses who will become very important as the story goes on. Standing at the smudged window in room 1280, the nurses deliberately kept their backs to their patient and watched the preach approach the hospital. They all breathed as shallowly as they could, trying to ignore the sensation of being observed and judged. "He has to be warned," one of the nurses said. "He won't believe us," the second one said. The head nurse's face was hard as stone. "Then he'll find out the hard way." These three women together kind of fit a bunch of different groups of women in fiction. They remind me of like the three witches from Hocus Pocus, or the three fates from the Disney Hercules movie, or the three fairies from Sleeping Beauty, or the three witches in Macbeth, or the Powerpuff Girls. Groups of women are usually witch-like, and there's typically one that's the leader, there's one that's the frumpy or the dopey one, and then there's the third one that's like shy. I'd lean into them being a three fates reference, simply because the story has a lot of references to mythology, like the priest's name is Arthur, like King Arthur. The hospital is called Heracles Hospital. It has stone columns on the front, and at the top of the structure is Cerberus. Heracles is the Greek name for Hercules. Hercules is actually the Roman name. The Disney movie just messed that up. And Cerberus obviously guards the underworld in Greek mythology. Arthur the priest rides a bike that he names Ruby. I tried looking for symbolism behind the name, but I could not find anything. Here's a good lesson for all you readers out there. When looking for symbolism, if you consider yourself well-versed in history and literature and things, you should just find word associations that you would think about when you see what could be a reference. Because whatever you, as a well-read person, would associate it with, you have to assume that that's what the writer is going for. So when I read Ruby, I think of a few different things, and most of them I can eliminate right off the bat. The bike is probably not a reference to Max and Ruby, or Pokemon Ruby, or Ruby the web series. Ruby next makes me think of the slippers in The Wizard of Oz. But it's not that, because it's not like the bike takes him home. It's not a magic bike. It's like there's nothing Wizard of Oz here. I think of a ruby-encrusted sword, but there's not really any depictions of Excalibur from the King Arthur myths having rubies in it, so I also don't think that that's a connection. I looked for famous people named Ruby and couldn't find anything. I looked for mentions of rubies in the Bible because he's a priest. I looked in Greek mythology because of Heracles Hospital, and then I didn't find anything and I gave up. And this is when you just come to the fact that you are limited by your own knowledge and that there might just sometimes be references that you don't understand, and so you ask your audience. And that's why it's important to talk to people and to work together, people who have other experiences with other cultural knowledge, and you ask them about their ideas, and then you can inform each other. And that's why I'm asking you guys, why do you think Arthur the priest named his bike Ruby? Anyway, Arthur looks at the statue of Cerberus on the hospital and thinks about its history and how it was made from stone cut out of a quarry. At the cost of countless men's lives, and it held generations of pain, struggle, and sorrow within its walls. Agony. Remember, Phineas thinks agony is the biggest and bestest emotion, but Arthur might have some other thoughts. But Arthur knew it also held hope and love and joy. That was always what he chose to see. When he looked up from the road, Arthur's gaze was drawn to the sky above the hospital. He smiled. One streaming golden ray of sunshine touched the back side of the red tile roof, spearing the blackness and slicing through the gray clouds pressing down on the building. "See, Ruby," Arthur said. "Like I said, it just needs a little faith." So this sunlight is faith and happiness and love and hope and God, maybe even Arthur himself since he's visiting the hospital, etc. It's like the yin-yang symbol. Like there's always darkness in light, and there's always light in darkness. There's always a little bit of opposites. So if this is like the place that Cerberus guards the underworld, it might also have a little bit of heaven in it. Maybe later we'll meet something that's all evil, but inside it might be a little bit of good. The story's going to discuss Arthur's beliefs in a very general way, like he prays a lot, but he never asks God for advice or quotes scripture or anything, which I think is kind of weird. Like it makes me wonder what the point is. He's going to follow his beliefs and try to do the right thing. And we, the reader, will know once the moral quandary comes up what the right thing and the wrong thing to do are. But we have more context than Arthur. So I don't know if the moral is supposed to be that actually the ray of light is a lie and trying to live like God is a fool's errand. Because I don't think that's what Scott believes for some reason. So because I don't think that that's what it's going for, but that seems to be on the surface what's being said, we need to look really deep to figure out what the story's trying to tell us. What is the moral? A new nurse named Mia overhears Arthur talking to his bike and strikes up a conversation with him. He introduces himself as Father Blythe, making his name Arthur Blythe. I looked up this name, as you do, and Blythe means kind or pleasant. There is an Arthur Blythe, but he's a jazz musician and I don't think he's relevant. Arthur thinks about how he wishes he could be referred to by his first name, but his bishop requested that he stop doing that because it's informal. I, personally, have always called my priest by their first name, so I don't know what this is talking about. This story takes place after FNAF 6, so it's not like it's a thing that happened in the distant past. It's not like, oh, back in the day people were more traditional. Like, no, this happens now/in the future. If we look into the origins of the name Mia, it could be another form of the name Maria, which is Jesus' mother's name. It's Mia's first day at the hospital for work, and it's also Arthur's first time at this hospital doing his priestly duties. So they're meeting each other, and each one thinks that the other person has more experience being here, but really it's both of their first days. Mia asks why Cerberus guards over the building even though he's a guard of Hades, and wonders if this is like a bad place.
Say the line, Bart!
This analysis was very funny because you'd say something that made me go, oh, that's an interesting interpretation, and then immediately cut to the direct quote where the narrator just says that outright with zero subtext. Yeah! In Greek mythology, Cerberus was tasked with preventing the dead from leaving the underworld. Arthur didn't know whether the Cerberus statue is meant to suggest it was going to keep the dead from entering the hospital, or whether it was going to keep the people who died in the hospital from moving on. The symbolism was made even murkier by the hospital's name. Heracles, the son of Zeus and Alcmene, was a mythological hero. One of his 12 labors was capturing Cerberus. The hospital's name and statuary left Arthur wondering if he was in a place of good or evil. Either way, he had a job to do. An ambulance comes up. It's blasting its siren. I felt I should mention this because sirens are also a mythological thing, but they're also just a thing that ambulances have. I don't know what I'm saying. Arthur has a great line about death and passing on. One of the things that's important about these books, whether they're canon or not, is that they give a good insight into the FNAF world and how it works. So we can take Arthur at his word that this is how it works. Arthur smiled. Death isn't a sad thing, it's a transition. And I'm kind of like a tour guide for people making the transition. Or maybe more like a traveling companion. Instead of letting fear take people away, I step in and take fear's place. Once fear is gone, the soul can reach the other side in peace. So once fear is gone, you can happiest day. In FNAF 3, Dave is no longer scared of the people in the Freddy masks because they gave him some cake, so now he's free to move on. And I love this, and we'll actually see a happiest day in the next epilogue. Arthur goes inside and meets the head nurse, Nurse Ackerman. We heard about her earlier. The book describes her as having too many teeth. I think it means that the way that she smiles, she shows too many teeth. Not that she actually has more teeth than the average person, but that is what it says. She shows Arthur to room 1280 and preferences that the patient inside is very weird. She says that he's been here for years. Arthur asks how many years, and she refuses to tell him because just like Scott Cawthon, she's the worst. We learn that this man has no family. The state took him off life support, but he didn't die. Arthur calls this a miracle. Nurse Ackerman says no, it's evil. Arthur finally goes inside. We get a build-up for 2 pages about what he sees. We're only told that he's freaking out about whatever it is. He asks the nurse who the patient is, and she says that she doesn't know. There's no DNA matches. She tells him that their sleep doctor says his brain patterns indicate that he's asleep, but he's having nightmares. Arthur steps up, and finally, we the reader get to hear the body described to us. What's lying in the bed is a body, a burnt body, burned to a crisp. It has a head, a torso, 2 arms, and legs, and I'm just gonna cut the suspense, it's William Afton. Which is weird, because in FNAF 6, one of his arms was just a little wiggly boy. He didn't have 2 full arms. His body in the bed is basically a skeleton. He has papery, ashy skin that's still technically covering him, but it's so light that it's transparent. It has lots of cracks, and Arthur can see his charred heart pumping. His black lungs filling with air. He has no face. Where his nose should be is a hole. His eyes are burned out. He has no lips or teeth. It's all black, papery skin covering his skull, and has cracks to the point where he can actually see parts of his brain. It was the fact that Arthur couldn't fit into his understanding of the world, his understanding of the universe, his understanding of the power that governed everything. This was the fact that this man was alive against all odds. So the power that governed everything to Arthur would be God. So this makes us ask the same question we had to ask in one of the earlier epilogues, whether agony/remnant, the thing that's keeping William alive, is the will of God, or if it goes against God. It's the same conversation we had about Phineas, like, praying but not praying to his food. Is agony an aspect of God's power, or is it the opposite of God? There's a very famous Einstein quote about how God and goodness are like light and darkness. God did not create evil, just like God did not create darkness. Evil is the absence of God, the way that darkness is the absence of light. So is agony, is darkness the absence of love and God, or is agony something that God made? We don't know yet. I say yet as if the book's going to tell us one way or the other. I just mean, like, from Phineas's epilogue and to now, we still don't know what agony is, really. I think that Arthur's line about how it's outside of his understanding of the universe, his understanding being God because he's a priest, points in the direction of it being separate from God. It is darkness, it is evil, etc. Arthur then asks himself if the patient has a soul. He walks further into the room and he feels an icy rawness on his skin, like something is trying to reach into his soul. I think this is like William's body, William's soul trying to latch onto a better body once it entered the room, but since Arthur has, like, his own willpower, he's able to, like, shoo it away, and so it has to stay into William's body. That's what I think's going on here. This then sets up the rest of the story. Arthur talks to Nurse Ackerman about the patient. She says she thinks he's evil. He's kept alive unnaturally. There's a dark presence in the room. She has all these gut feelings that evil is afoot. If William is, like, in this unconscious dream state, maybe is he able to reach out into the field easier because he's, like, disconnected from his surroundings, and so he's just manipulating the 0 point field? Maybe. This is when I would have loved all that field stuff to come back and to be like, yes, that is what's happening. Instead, we just kind of have to theorize that it's possible because it's a way of reading the text. But from the way this story goes, I don't really think there's a way to be like, yes, definitively, it was all William. At least from this story. I often talk about how these stories are written as if the reader doesn't know things about FNAF. Like, every time they go to a Freddy's, it has to be like, that's a Freddy Fazbear's, it has animatronics, animatronics are talking robot things. So, like, when we are reading the story, we know it's William, because we know the story of FNAF. But the book doesn't think that we know that or want us to know that, so the nurse says that he's evil, and, like, yeah, we know that, but the book has to be like, no, the priest says that it's a miracle that's keeping him alive. He's just a guy. We shouldn't hate people who are disfigured. We shouldn't fear them. We should love them. It's even actually better to love them because no one else is loving them because they're in so much pain. It's our job to care for them. And, like, in principle, yes, that is what you should do in real life. But in Five Nights at Freddy's, that's not what you should do to William. That's what I was saying earlier about, like, evilness. I can agree in principle that what Arthur is saying is morally correct, but in this instance I know it's wrong because I know that's William Afton. The book has not told me it's William Afton because it's pretending that William FNAF isn't a series, so it's weird. I don't know. The way these stories are told sometimes is really weird. Nurse Ackerman shows Arthur William's brain activity and through some science mumbo-jumbo tells him that there are 2 consciousnesses inside of him and that they're both vying for control of his brain. She thinks that they're tormenting each other, and that that's evil. And Arthur says, no, it's his job to have faith in humanity, and there's good in everything, and the nurse gets mad and leaves. So this passage is what spurs on the books are canon debates. So in Ultimate Custom Night, the game, we learn that William is being tortured by someone who he shouldn't have killed, and that none of the spirits are able to move on until that person lets go of William and lets them all move on. So the idea is that this story is answering the question of who that is. We played the game, that question was left open-ended, not ambiguous, not solvable, but open-ended. We would solve it later, and that this book is giving us that answer. In The Man in Room 1280, William is technically alive. He is conscious, there are brain waves, but it seems like he's being tortured, which would recontextualize UCN as being this weird coma nightmare torment that he's in, as opposed to being the afterlife, which is what the game itself implies is happening. A character in the game called the One You Should Not Have Killed would thus be this other presence that's torturing his brain. We can figure out from the fact that we've read a lot of the Sitchwraith stories that the person inside of William right now is Andrew. Andrew is the one that William should not have killed. Except I don't think so. I see why people connected these dots, but I just do not follow. If Andrew is the one you should not have killed, that does not change the fact that at the very least, Charlie and Dave are present in William's punishment. This is some, video game lore stuff, but Charlie is actively trying to free the spirits from the one you should not have killed within William's torment. In the game, she says,
"The others are like animals, but I am very aware. The others are like animals, but I am very aware."
Whoever Old Man Consequences is trying to get the one William should not have killed to stop it and let William and everyone else who died move on. And then Dave also has lines. So that's at minimum 4 consciousnesses other than William. The one you should not have killed, Old Man Consequences, Dave, and Charlie. And then there's also the fact that we're kind of told that the other spirits in UCN are actually the people's spirits.
What is this new prison? Is it me trapped, or is it you? Perhaps it is us both.
So if Withered Bonnie is there, then the other kids probably are too. So William should not have one consciousness in him that's torturing him, and that he's also torturing back, because that's not what UCN is. UCN is a bunch of different consciousnesses all in one, and they're all torturing William. Or you could also argue that only the Vengeful Spirit is torturing William. Doesn't really matter. There's also the fact that UCN ends with Golden Freddy letting everyone go and them being able to move on, possibly. Or it's just William escaping. Either way, that's not what happens in the end of this story. Or in a future epilogue, we'll talk about it then too. I see the argument that it might be a parallel, but I think it's so different it's hard to compare the two things. Anyway, next we get Mia's perspective. She's in the break room. The other 3 nurses start talking about how they should kill the man in room 1280. They're mad that Arthur doesn't see the evil that's inside of him, and Nurse Thomas says that she tries to see the good in people too, but when the writing's on the wall, it's on the wall. This is a Bible quote. Not just a Bible quote, but an extremely important reference relating the rest of this story, the man in room 1280, to the book of Daniel. The expression, the writing's on the wall, is a very popular phrase. People typically use it to mean that something is really obvious or certainly going to happen, and it comes from the biblical book of Daniel. So there's a king, and he's throwing a feast, and he orders that all the gold and silver goblets and utensils get taken from the temple where they were an offering to God and are brought to his little party thing so that they can dine using them. This is bad because you're taking from God for your own greed and personal use. During the feast, a human finger appears, and it starts to write a message on the wall. No one knows what the message means. The words are literally in a different language. So they go and they get Daniel, because Daniel is a real smart guy, and he comes and he reads the message and he translates it for the king. Now for some background information. The king's father had been a good man. He was a good king who did God's will. But then as he got older, he started to do things really just for what he wanted and stopped listening to God. And so for that, God stripped him of his throne. He didn't just strip him of the throne, he also stripped him partially of his humanity. He took his mind and he had to go and live amongst the animals. He lived with the donkeys and the oxen, and he learned that God is a higher authority than kings. I'm not a biblical scholar, but it seems like the point is that humans see kings as something like high above them, but that kings themselves should see God as being so high above them that they are like animals. A king is to God as a donkey is to a man. They're so far beneath that they don't matter. Now I am a FNAF scholar, and this brings to mind a quote that I just played you.
The others are like animals, but I am very aware.
Just some food for thought. So Daniel tells the king, that's the old king's son who's now ruling, that he should have learned from his father's mistakes, but he didn't. He took God's items from the temple for his own use, He's worshipping gold instead of God, and so God sent the hand that then wrote on the wall. And the words on the wall say that God has decided that the king's days as king are numbered. So again, the writing on the wall is a prophecy of a bad thing that's going to happen. He will no longer be the king. The kingdom will be divided and ruled by other people. That night, the king dies, and so the kingdom is split amongst other people. So why did I tell you this Bible story? Well, Arthur decides that he wants to communicate with William. William's vital signs start to react with Arthur asking him questions, and eventually, William raises his arm out of bed, and with a finger, starts spelling things in the air. Arthur writes down the message, but can't really understand it. It's meaningless to him. Faz, Benter, Dis, Center. To which Nurse Thomas tells him that this means Fazbear Entertainment Distribution Center. So if you're following the religious and the mythological references throughout the story, we now have an inversion of a holy thing. In the book of Daniel, God writes a message on the wall, warning an evil king, who then has to go get a smart guy to translate it. In The Man in Room 1280, William, who is the story's incarnation of evil, so he's like the devil, writes a message with his finger. And a priest, a good man, can't understand it, and so the character working against the priest has to translate it. So God becomes the devil, the evil king becomes a good priest, and the smart man becomes whatever Nurse Thomas is supposed to be. In Daniel, the king tries to stop this prophecy from happening. He appoints Daniel as like the third in command of the whole kingdom, and is like, with you by my side, God will surely favor me. And then that doesn't happen. It's too late. The thing that's said is going to happen no matter what. In The Man in Room 1280, it's actually the opposite way around. If Arthur does nothing, then what William wrote will not happen. If nothing is done, nothing will happen. Arthur has to go out of his way to work harder to make the thing that William wrote happen. So while when God makes a prophecy, it happens no matter what, when William writes about his will, he has to actually then work hard to have it executed. It's the opposite of being set in stone. It's something that's actually difficult to happen. So again, you got the Bible story, and then you got the opposite of it, which would be William's will happening. Arthur keeps telling himself that keeping William alive is a good thing. In the 3 hours he'd sat here, he'd realized that a part of him, a truly traitorous part of him, half believed what Nurse Ackerman had said. Was something evil keeping the man alive? Just thinking that disturbed him greatly. How could he be a priest and believe that evil had more power over the body than good? What if something good was keeping the man alive? Wasn't that more believable? Of course it was, he told himself. It was divine energy that created worlds. Couldn't that energy sustain life beyond the time when life is viable? Certainly it could. Although, Arthur's logical side argued, divine energy wasn't the only kind of energy in the world. Stop it, Arthur admonished himself. So after deciphering the message, Arthur decides to leave for the day, excited that he's getting somewhere. But he's also secretly glad that he's able to leave because the room, which already smelled like bile and feces and death, now also smells like sulfur. Sulfur is one of those cultural things that books and movies will assume their audience understands. If you haven't smelled sulfur before, it's a rock that smells really, really strong when you heat it up. And in the Bible, it's described that when God destroys Sodom and Gomorrah, it smells like sulfur. So sulfur is a stand-in for God's wrath or the presence of evil. Like evil places will smell of sulfur. Doing evil leaves behind the smell of sulfur. And so Arthur as a priest, and us as an audience who should know this, can tell that William is something evil because he smells like sulfur. But I guess Arthur misses that. The next day, Arthur asks William some yes or no questions, including if he'd worked at the Fazbear Entertainment Distribution Center. William doesn't respond, which in their communication means no. He says no, he didn't have family there. No, he doesn't have unfinished business there. But when Arthur asks if he wants to go there, William signals yes. So now Arthur's gonna make it his mission to grant this horribly disfigured dying man his wish to go to the Fazbear Entertainment Distribution Center. Arthur has to talk to the hospital administrator to get permission to take William out of the hospital. This administrator's name is Peter, so Peter is blocking William's access to Fazbear. Peter is the name of one of Jesus' disciples, who also became the first pope. In popular culture, it's believed that St. Peter stands at the gates of heaven and lets people in, or not. You see this in cartoons a lot.
St. Peter!
I'll give you a chance to get into heaven. You have 24 hours to go back and do one good deed.
So Cerberus from Greek mythology, who guards the gates of Hades so no one can get out, and Peter, the figure from Christianity, who guards the gates of heaven so no one bad can get in, are both keeping William where he is. This is implying that William is not deserving to go into heaven, and is deserving to be in Hades. We're like halfway through the story now. The 3 nurses decide that they want to kill William before Arthur can take him anywhere. This is where Andrew comes in, right there on page number 18. The nurses see a little boy with black curly hair wearing an alligator mask. He's started to appear recently around the hospital. The book does not say that he's been there for the years that William has been there. This is more of a recent thing, so it's curious why he's showing up. What does this have to do with what's going on in the story? We don't know. We're actually never told. One of the nurses tries to kill William. Andrew appears. She's forced to vividly relive her worst memory, the death of her own son, and she feels the agony as if she was actually back in that memory. She drops the morphine syringe that she's trying to kill William with and runs away. The next nurse tries to smother William with a pillow. The pillow, to an unnatural degree, fills with blood and pus and bile. And then Andrew grabs the pillow and takes it away and drops it on the ground, and it explodes with an impossible amount of fluid and covers the nurse, and she faints. To be fair, the book is calling the entity that's doing this a shadow, not Andrew. We just know that it's Andrew. It's also kind of like another inversion of God, because in a hospital, a force that's keeping a patient alive would be God normally, because that would be a good thing. But in this case, it's evil that's keeping him alive. The third nurse sets up a protection ring of lit candles before trying to inject William with air, which will kill you. This doesn't work, because candles won't stop Andrew, and so he actually takes the needle and stabs it into the nurse's own neck, and then she has to quickly take it out, otherwise she might die, and she runs away because she's scared, and she hears a little boy giggle. Mia finally makes it into the room for the first time to see William, and she freaks out, describing him as the exact opposite of nature. So, unnatural. Evil. Arthur goes back to the hospital. It's raining now, so there's no rays of sunlight breaking through the clouds. Now it's just fully in darkness. It's fully evil. Rain can symbolically mean a lot of things. It can be good, like baptism, or bad, like the flood that destroyed the world. In this case, it's the second thing. Mother Nature was trying to obliterate an enemy. Arthur sees the little boy peek his head around the Cerberus statue as he enters the hospital. So Andrew is now appearing to everyone. Arthur's been pushed up the chain of people to ask to get permission to move William, so now he's going to talk to the head attorney, a woman whose name is Graves, because graves are what happen when you die. Mia, having now seen William, tries to use her friendship with Arthur to convince him to not take William where he wants to go. Mia thinks that there's a reason that she got this job at the hospital, and that it's her purpose to stop William from leaving. The man in room 1280, he can't leave this place. I can't explain why I know this, but I know it. He can't go where he wants to go. You can't take him. The other nurses are right. I thought they were lunatics. I admit it. I did. But now I understand. They're right. There's something in that poor man. There's something in there, and you can't take it where it wants to go. You can't. It will be devastating, even catastrophic if you do. I don't know how or why, but I do know it. But beyond what she'd seen, all she had was a feeling, an intuition. Maybe it was a premonition. Mia, I've lived long enough to see the kinds of evil that exist in our world. I haven't seen it all by any means, but I've seen more than enough to understand that my glass is always full attitude has no basis in earthly reality. I should be jaded by now, I suppose. I should be pessimistic, ready to see the worst, but I'm not. I'm not because I choose not to let the past color the way I see the present. I choose to expect, in every moment, to find what's good. But what if you don't? Then there's always the next moment. But what if there isn't? Mia could hear the fear in her voice. She brushed away the tears that threatened to spill. Father Blythe breathed in and out slowly. Then I'll move on to whatever my journey holds next for me, I suppose. That's all we can do. That's all I'm trying to do for the man in room 1280. So cool. Arthur's a good man, I agree with him, it just sucks that he's wrong. Arthur takes William to a car, in a wheelchair. They go to the distribution center, which is currently in operation, so Fredbear's Fazzy Bear definitely still currently exists. He comments that the distribution center is at least 20 years old, which is it's probably way older than that. I don't know why that's a detail in the book. We'll talk about it in the analysis section. He's worried that he won't be able to get William inside because he didn't ask Fazbear for permission to be there, but he finds a loading dock, and so he parks there, and he says, "Ask and ye shall receive," because he's a priest. And then he takes William inside, and then there's animatronic parts and costumes and toys, and also animatronic costumes and human costumes. Arthur parks William next to a shelf, and then William explodes. Black blood and tar spray everywhere. The same kind of black blood that comes out of people who are touched by the Stitch Wraith. So it's like liquid agony, I guess. His blood explodes everywhere, and his organs and his veins just pop, and there's bile and blood and everything, and then what remains just collapses into a pile of dust. So William's bits and bobs fly everywhere, and then the story ends with this section. Instinctively, Arthur began praying again, but as he prayed, he heard something that wiped even the thought of prayer from his mind. He heard a rush of pattering footsteps. Little sprightly footsteps capering away toward the shelving area of the building. What was that? Arthur wiped his eyes again and looked around. At first, all he saw was the man's remains. For the first time since Arthur had gathered the courage to look at the man, all the exposed insides were still. Then Arthur's gaze landed on a trail of tiny footprints that were stamped in the man's charred blood and fluids. He followed the trail and saw the footprints continued away from the man, etching the floor in the man's blood like fearful hieroglyphics marking the way. The way to where? The man had moved on, but something hadn't. "Father, is everything okay?" A man's voice, pitched high in shock, asked Arthur. Arthur turned. The speaker was the red-headed man with the clipboard. He stared at the floor, his face blanched, his eyes wide. "Actually, no. I don't think everything is okay," Arthur said. For the first time in his life, he was sure of it. And that's the man in room 1280. Let's talk about it. Analysis. Arthur thinks that William moved on, but that's something different. That something theoretically would be Andrew. We later learn this to not be true, that both William and Andrew remain. It's weird. In 1:35 a.m., I looked into the meaning of the number 135 and discussed how often a colon signifies a Bible passage. 1280 does not have a colon, but this story is so biblical-based that I felt like I had to look in the Bible to see if that's what Scott was referencing. As always, when using the Bible, we look at the King James Version. I looked in Daniel first, because that had already been mentioned, but very few books in the Bible, including Daniel, go up to verse 80. So by using this, I narrowed it down to every book in the Bible that had a chapter 12 that went to verse 80. And I narrowed it down to 0, because none of them do. So if you find any meaning for 1280, let me know. Timeline-wise, the story's kind of a mess. It must take place after FNAF 6, because William's burned and in a hospital bed. So then how does he know about the Fazbear Distribution Center? He's theoretically been spring-locked since like the 90s or the 80s. Since then, Fazbear has gone out of business, reopened with the FNAF 6 location, which then went out of business again, and then reopened as the Fazbear Entertainment that made like the Help Wanted game. So why would the same distribution center be still open? Why would William know about it? Why has it only been there for 20 years? It should either be new, or it should have been there for much longer. The fact that Fetch is there, and Fetch is from a much older Freddy, seems to show that it is from a long time ago and isn't just a new distribution center. Mentioning Fetch, the fact that he's in this distribution center when William explodes and then Andrew goes into him. Fetch then makes his way from, this must be in Utah, because it's whatever state FNAF 6 took place in, from Utah to Washington State for the events of Fetch to happen, and then from Washington State, left to go somewhere where he broke down in a thunderstorm only to be found and then brought to Phineas. All of this having to happen between the time when William explodes to when the Stitch Wraith begins, which is pretty far behind where we currently are in the Stitch Wraith, right? Like Phineas taking everything and building the Stitch Wraith happens before Larson starts his investigation. But then the Man in Room 1280 has to happen at least a year after the events of FNAF 6, which Larson was also present for. It's confusing. Like, all these different parts are described by different authors, and so it's very possible that, like, one person implies it was a very long time ago, and someone else implies that it wasn't that long ago, but that the not that long ago is actually a longer period of time than the not that long ago. One of the things I want to talk about in the story is that the book makes William into an embodiment of evil. I think that stories or myths usually pick between the concept of evil being like, there's an embodiment of evil that makes men act bad, or that inside every man is the capacity to be evil. There's two bears inside you, one is good, one is bad. Which one is in control? It's the one you feed. Or evil can just corrupt and take over people, and it's not your fault, you've been mind controlled by the bunny ears, or wearing a second hat. So the story seems to be that second one. One of the notes I wrote in the book is, William can just explode, I guess. Again, this does not line up with UCN. UCN seems to be that William can't just leave, otherwise he would. Arguably, he leaves when he beats the ultimate mode, the final challenge, but like beating the final challenge and thus being able to leave, and arriving at the Fazbear Distribution Center and then finally exploding because you're in the presence of all the stuff you want to go into are not the same thing. It seems like he's locked up in this one, and then in this one, he's holding on with the hope that he can go and spread his agony everywhere. Again, UCN and the Man in Room 1280 are not the same event in the same continuity. They almost, like, cannot be based on what we're shown. Like, the idea that the dramatic scene where Golden Freddy fades into the background in UCN is depicting the same moment as William exploding and his bile going everywhere, and then Andrew's little footprint in his blood walking over to the Fetch animatronic and then other things on the shelves. It's just clearly not the same thing. So no, Stitchline's not games canon. So Andrew is not the Vengeful Spirit, yeah. Cassidy, she does mean something. One of the more interesting paths I found myself going down during this project is the question of whether Fazbear Frights could be a continuation of the Silver Eyes trilogy as opposed to the games. So far, we have not seen anything that would make that impossible, as long as we stick to the Stitch line. Obviously, Coming Home conflicts with the Silver Eyes. It also conflicts with the games. So sticking to the Stitch line, it's very possible that it's in Silver Eyes continuity. Silver Eyes takes place in the mid-90s. It takes place 10 years after the MCI, so it's 1995. This is when William's spring locking takes place. A little while later, he escapes, opens Circus Babies, does experiments with the Fun Times, etc., and then the animatronics take him and throw him into a furnace. So in the mid-90s, William is thrown into a furnace and burned. So is it possible that after this, his charred body, kept alive by remnant and agony, was taken to a hospital for the man in room 1280 to happen? Possible? Yes. However, when we learn more about this mysterious fire that Detective Larson knows about, it might make this ending impossible. So we'll have to keep a lookout. Also, just William's body being thrown into a furnace and him coming out looking like the man in room 1280. Did I say 1280 before? Oof. Ooh, I may have messed up my joke. The idea of William's corpse being thrown into a furnace, and then that being why he looks like the man in room 1280, makes way more sense than if Scrap Trap caught on fire, because, like, how did he regrow an arm, and where did the suit go? This is especially odd if this is supposed to be books canon, and if Burn Trap is supposed to have any of William's body inside of him, because that would mean that he was burned in the suit in FNAF 6, which is under the Pizzaplex, taken out of there, exploded in a distribution center, and then somehow his body got back to underneath FNAF 6. Like, no. But we're not talking about that. Frights fiction-wise, it's just building up the idea that William was a great evil. Obviously, the real Fazbear Entertainment would want to say that William, this bad guy who used to exist, he's bad and the murderer. We have nothing to do with him. He's the devil, probably. It fits the story. It's based on public information because people know that William was arrested, and so it makes sense. The next story is a Stitch Wraith stinger, and we're finally going to catch back up with Detective Larson. Thank you for watching. Be sure to be nice to each other in the comments. Consider supporting the creators you admire. Never lose sight of the things that are important to you. Remember that Freddy stands for friendly, respectful engagement, discussion, and discourse yield success. I gotta go find Toto. He left in the middle of the recording to go take a nap, and he has not been back yet, so I'll see you next time. I would like to thank my March patrons: Brandon, Lady Lilac, Lauren V, Morgan, Nan, Scott, and Sophie, along with Billy, Klaus, Eliza, Halmar, Johnny the Night Guard, Kira, Lauren R, Rhiannon, Rose, Sebhar, Thamagata, World's Greatest Bard, Ya Boy Peachy, and Zany Face, along with Emily, Jinx, Jose, Just That Spark, Rolo, Riley, Shadowmaster, and Tanner McCoolman, as well as Jeannie and Ray.